All right, welcome everyone. Really excited to get going with this week's live training. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Today I'm going to be covering the only 4 ways to improve your mental health. Think of it as the 4 ways that you have available to you to improve your mental health in the grand scheme of things, in the entirety of the mental health industry. Now, that may seem like a big claim to say there's only 4 ways to do it, but really what I mean is that there are 4 distinct paths available, 4 distinct philosophies, if you will. And inside of each one of those 4 distinct philosophies, there may be several different options depending on which one we're talking about. But chances are you're listening to this right now and you're a part of our online community because you truly want to improve your mental health. Chances are you don't feel like you have the mental health that you really deserve. And I really care about making sure that you do get the mental health that you deserve. I've also learned over the years that one size does not fit all people, right? Different people need different methods depending on what their particular situation is, what their background is, and what their goals are, and also how they want the journey to go. So, for example, if you want to go from New York to San Francisco, you could go by car, by plane, by train, and there are different pros and cons to each one of those different routes. So in this lesson, I'm going to be walking through pretty much the only 4 routes that I've seen that are truly available, just so I want to help you understand kind of the pros and cons of different ones. I want to share with you the ones that I think are best for the right types of people, depending on their situation. And I really just honestly want to help you figure out what is going to be best for you, because if I can play a role in helping you get access to the form of help that you feel is best for you, then that's fantastic, and I feel like I've done my job and I can sleep soundly at night. And obviously, to state the obvious, I have a particular method that I use, but I'll be the first one to tell you that my method is not, for everybody. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and my process is only the right type of fit for the right type of person. So I genuinely just want to make sure that you get access to whatever form of help is truly best for you. And let's explore this. And I also want to hear what you have to say in the comments as well, because you each have your own unique perspective. And if you found that one of these 4 has been particularly helpful for you or not helpful, share your experience with us in the community, because if you can help somebody else understand what types of effects they can experience from each of these routes, it will help them figure out which one is best for them. Okay? So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So the very first route or philosophy, think of these as like hats that you could wear, or schools of thought, if you will. So one school of thought that is very predominant and common, it's been out there for several decades now, is the philosophy that depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges can best be described as a permanent disease that you have that is really just something that needs to be corrected through biochemistry, through pharmaceuticals. Right? And so this would be the general opinion of most general physicians, as well as psychiatrists. So if you go to those people, if you've ever heard the expression, when you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So this is why sometimes people get a little frustrated, because psychiatrists tend to only spend maybe between 5 and 20 minutes with somebody. And really what they're looking for is they're trying to figure out what medication they can prescribe for you. And so I've encountered a lot of people who get frustrated because what they're really looking for is they're looking for someone to talk to. They're looking for someone to really listen to what they're feeling. They're looking to sort of sort through their issues. Maybe they're looking for strategies. Maybe they're looking for coping mechanisms. But psychiatrists don't really do that. The majority of them don't. There are some psychiatrists who do a combination of talk therapy and medications. But the typical psychiatrist, at least here in the United States, over in the United Kingdom, Australia especially too, typically they're usually pretty quick to want to write a prescription. And that doesn't mean they're right or wrong or any of that. It's just they're trying to help in the way that they know how to help. They're trying to listen for your symptoms. They're typically going to try to provide a diagnosis and tell you, yep, this is what you have. And this is essentially going to be what you're going to have for probably the rest of your life, but let's give you a medication to help make your life a little easier. And their goal is to see if they can pair you up with a medication that's going to make your life about 10 to 25% better in most cases. That's the average type of impact a medication will have. Some people have zero positive impact. Some people have substantially larger positive impact. In my experience, the average result people will get is in that like 10 to 25% improvement range. It's usually a little closer to the 10% range, but it just depends on you, depends on your biochemistry, depends on what you respond to. There is some genetic testing that is available where they can try to determine what type of medication they think you will respond best to. Now, this, I'm going to be honest, I have not encountered enough people where I can say definitively or not whether the genetic testing really makes a big difference or not. I've only had probably about 3 to 4 dozen people I've consulted with or worked with who did the genetic testing and then got paired up with a medication. It seems kind of inconclusive as to whether or not that really got them a better result with medication or not, which tells me that maybe it doesn't make that much of a difference, but I could be wrong. I'm sure there are some people out there who've gotten the genetic testing and then gotten paired up with a medication, and that has helped quite a bit. So this is just a school of thought. Now let's talk through what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages. Well, the advantages of going down this route are, firstly, you don't have to learn any new skills. You don't have to learn any new coping mechanisms. If you're going to try to create better living through biochemistry, then all you simply need to have is you just have to find a medication that's going to work for you. So it doesn't take a lot of effort or time in the sense of you needing to learn new material and apply things and practice and those types of things. So in a sense, it does have an easiness to it. For people who have no problem being on medication, it's also great. You know, if you can find a medication that works well for you and you have no qualms about being on medication, then that's totally fine. Then that's great for you. The other advantage of going down this route, of course, is that if you can find something that works for you sustainably, you can have a pretty good long-term trajectory of being able to keep your symptoms at least at a more manageable level. The other advantage is typically you can get started with it and it will start to make an impact between 2 and 4 weeks. So as long as you have enough ability to wait that period of time and you find one that works for you, then you can go ahead and do that. So the disadvantages of going down this route, however, would be that in my experience, the majority of people who go down just the medication route exclusively do not find it to be a very viable long-term solution if their goal is to live with exceptional mental health, or they would like to get as close to anxiety or depression free as possible. Almost always medication is not going to accomplish that. So sometimes people get a little frustrated because they'll be on an anti-anxiety medication or an antidepressant, and it will improve how they feel a little bit, but then it's been several months or several years and they still feel like they're dealing with the intrusive thoughts. They still feel like they're having challenges functioning. They still are dealing with the same core issues, and medication is also not going to fix other core issues in your life that might be causing you stress, like if you've got relationship problems, if you've got financial problems, if you've got challenges with your career, things of that nature. No medication is going to solve those problems. And I'm a big believer that depression and anxiety are not just a biochemical, anxiety and depression don't have a biochemical cause, they have a biochemical effect, is my philosophy. And what I mean by that is that anxiety and depression is not random, right? People get anxious and depressed when there are certain criteria happening in their life. A big reason why people get anxious and depressed, my view is, when there's an area of their life that they feel stuck in. One of those would be their relationship, their finances, their career. And so if somebody, for instance, had a dream of being a professional football player, and then they injured their knee in college and they were no longer able to pursue their football career and they became depressed as a result, medication is not going to help solve that issue, right? It may help that person get through the day. It may help them feel a little bit better. And as they start to feel a little bit better, maybe they'll start to take some new actions in their life, things like that. But on the whole, usually there is other work that needs to be done. That person needs to be able to do some inner work to figure out what is their life going to be like going forward. How do they move on past grieving the future that they thought that they were going to have, right? That requires things beyond medication, right? So medication has that one disadvantage. If you're looking for a more full solution, typically medication is not going to be sufficient. Now, there are some exceptions to this. I have encountered people where they find a medication that makes them feel totally right as rain, and that's all they need. And that's a really fine thing. I have a family member who's going to remain nameless, who has found this to be the case, where as long as they take their medication, they feel great, they feel fine, they feel pleasant. But that is the exception, not the rule in the typical case. Okay. The other disadvantage, really, this is the same kind of thing I was saying a second ago, but I want to add more clarity. In terms of it not being a very viable long-term solution for a lot of people, the big reason is it doesn't get rid of intrusive thinking. It usually just numbs the emotional impact of the intrusive thinking. And so unless we figure out a way to keep the mind from constantly populating intrusive thoughts, people tend to have challenges with medication being a very viable long-term route. Okay, one other disadvantage, although this is fairly rare, there can be some side effects and sometimes some extreme side effects. Some people can develop something called serotonin syndrome that is developed due to a certain type of medication. It's fairly rare, but it can be very severe. There's things like TD and different things like that. I have had a couple clients who had TD because they were on medication for a long time, and then their body rejected it and had a big issue with that, and they had to learn some natural strategies. But on the whole, most people are not going to have super dramatic side effects. They may have some side effects like lethargy, their energy may go down, they may feel numb, things of that nature, okay? But medication can be very, very good and viable for people who especially want like a quick fix, who are looking to just improve their daily functioning a bit better, and that can be good. Oh, one other challenge that can come up, just to be aware, is that very often people continue to cycle through different medications, trying to find one that works for them in the long term. I remember I had one client who had been on 23 different medications over 10 years, a very long list. So very often people are trying to play like what I call the pharmaceutical lottery, where they keep placing a bet hoping that they're going to find something that solves their issue, when usually that is a tall tale sign that medication may be adding value to you, it just may not be sufficient to get you the full mental health that you're desiring. Okay? So typically if you can find one that gets you about a 10 to 25% improvement, that's usually pretty good. And that's usually about as good as it's going to get. And if you feel like you are dissatisfied with only getting that level of improvement, that's a pretty clear sign that you might need to add one of these other three strategies into the fold. Okay? So the second core philosophy out there is a very related philosophy, but it's slightly distinct. And so this would be the route or philosophy of traditional therapy or traditional counseling. Just to clear the air, I am not a counselor or a therapist. I can explain why here shortly. There was a very purposeful decision I made to not become a therapist or counselor for reasons I'll explain in a moment. But there are so many people out there who are therapists and counselors who are doing good work. I love therapists and counselors because they care immensely about their clients and their patients. Many of them can be quite effective. Therapy can be incredibly good for a certain type of person. There are also some challenges with therapy and counseling, and depending on what type of person you are, it may not be the right fit for you. So let's explore this in a little more depth. So one big thing to understand about the philosophy of therapists and counselors and how therapists are trained is the dominant portion of them also view anxiety and depression as either a genetic issue or simply just a permanent disease that you're going to have indefinitely. And so their goal, they believe, is simply to help you learn to cope with the illness. And so they're not really looking to help you solve the problem. They don't believe in most cases that you can live a life without chronic anxiety or depression. They're really more aimed at trying to make sure that you can feel as little anxiety or depression as possible and that you can develop some effective coping mechanisms. For most therapists, if they could help you experience 20 to 30% less anxiety or depression, they would view that as a huge, huge accomplishment. And that tends to be how they're looking at things. Now, the challenge with this is the coping mentality, I think, kind of locks you a little bit in a box. Now, that's my point of view. You don't have to agree with me necessarily, but that's why there's different routes to improve your mental health. So if we look at a problem as fundamentally unsolvable, then that already tells you what your constraints are, what your limits are of being able to actually improve. If their goal is to help you improve by 10 to 25%, right, maybe a little bit more depending on your particular therapist, then that gives you a sense as to what you can hope to accomplish in that particular arena, so to speak, through that particular methodology. So many people, and you may be one of these people, you are literally just looking for some coping mechanisms. You just want a way to get through the day a little easier. You're not expecting to live without anxiety or without depression. You're looking to simply just function a little bit better. And if that's the case, therapy can be a viable route for you to go. They're typically going to start by trying to unpack your background over the course of several sessions. So they're in a view typically of wanting to take their time. They're not really in a rush. There's not usually a lot of urgency to, help you get change right away. So they're going to want to unpack your background, how you've been feeling. That'll happen in the first 1 to 4 sessions typically. Then what they're typically going to do is they're going to go to their top 2 to 4 standard coping mechanisms that they recommend. For most therapists these days, that is going to include some breathing exercises, some meditation, potentially some journaling, and then they may have 1 or 2 particular strategies that they recommend based off of their particular specialty. So if they are trained in CBT, they might teach you a couple processes of identifying negative thoughts and challenging negative thoughts, for example. If you are going to a therapist that prefers DBT, they're going to try to teach you to simply notice that the thoughts are there and accept the fact that the thoughts are there and let them pass. There's another slightly more rare type of traditional therapy called EMDR, which is very often used if you've got a negative traumatic past memory. It can be, I found it to be a mixed bag. About half of people find it to be helpful, half of people find it to not really have much of an impact. And after they teach you those couple core strategies, they're typically just going to revert to providing a space for you to talk. And so this is a really important point because a lot of you guys are, I hear this all the time. I have people who have been in traditional therapy for years or decades, and they're curious as to why they're still struggling. They think that they're doing the right thing. They think, well, I pursued medication, I pursued therapy. Why am I not better by now? Right? Because they feel like they're still dealing with the same issues. And this may be the reason why. Therapists and counselors are trained in what is called non-directive therapy. It's also referred to as passive therapy. So think of this as like the overarching paradigm, right, which really just means like the school of thought of traditional therapy. And this goes all the way back to Sigmund Freud from like the late 1800s. So the idea that Sigmund Freud had was, he called it the talking cure. So the idea was you put a patient on the couch, you let them talk, you ask them questions, you reflect back to them what they say to you like a mirror. There's this metaphor that is used in teaching therapy where the therapist is meant to be like a mirror for the patient. And the therapist is not meant to direct the patient. The therapist is not meant to guide the session in any particular way. They're not meant to show up to the session with an agenda of how, what to teach them. They're meant to essentially let the patient's free-flowing thoughts be the thing that directs the course of the therapy. And the idea is, if you just provide that space for the patient, to explore their thoughts enough, they will eventually arrive at new conclusions on their own. And to some degree, this sometimes helps. Like some of you have had the experience where you're frustrated with somebody and you don't even know quite why you're frustrated, but you just let it out and you get it out and you start talking, and then you all of a sudden through the talking of it, you go, you know what? That doesn't make any sense. And all of a sudden you feel better by the time you've actually talked it out. So it can add value. And for many people, this is all they need to do. There are some people where as long as they just go to therapy once a week and they have that cathartic release of like getting their thoughts and feelings out, they feel great. And that's all they need and that's all they want and that's what they want to do. For some people, however, a good portion of people, in fact, therapy can cause the sensation of not making a lot of progress. People can feel like they're hitting a plateau. People can feel like they're not making a ton of headway. And that tends to be because they're going into a therapy session and they're simply going through the same repetitive mental and emotional patterns that they would otherwise do alone, but now they're just talking to somebody else. And so they're talking about what depresses them about the past, and they're talking to them about what worries them about the future, and they're talking to them about what bothers them about their spouse. And they keep recycling the same thoughts over and over and over again through therapy. And in fact, therapy can even reinforce some of those negative thoughts, because now we're going and we're releasing them, and we're not being judged for them, and we're not being challenged by we're not having those thoughts be challenged in some cases. And so the cycle just continues and repeats. All right. Now, obviously, I'm talking in terms of general findings. Some of you have had experiences with therapists that have been very, very helpful. But I just know the majority of the people that I consult with find some frustrations with therapy, even though they like their therapist and they can tell their therapist is a good person, their therapist cares about them, and their therapist has probably even added some value to their life. It's just that people get this sensation that therapy is not usually enough to get their mental health really where they deserve it to be, and that may be the case for you. What I have found to be true is if you have done therapy for a consistent 6-month period, you will either feel like you are steadily inclining towards your mental health goals, or you will feel like you've hit a plateau by that 6-month period. And that is a very good indicator of what type of progress you can expect to see later on in therapy. I have consultations with people all the time who've been doing it for years or decades. It is exceptionally rare. I'm not saying it never happens, but I'm just saying it's exceptionally rare for people to have a breakthrough in the 5th year of therapy that they couldn't have gotten within the first 6 months of therapy. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, right? It's just the old adage of, if you've been doing it for that long and you haven't improved, why would you keep doing just that thing, right? So if you find it valuable, that's fantastic. Go ahead and keep doing it. I am in favor of you doing anything that actually improves your mental health. That's what I'm an advocate for. So I've gone through some of the disadvantages. Let's talk about the advantages. The advantages are they'll teach you some coping mechanisms. Another advantage is they give you someone to talk to that feels very safe. And for many of you, you might be in a situation where you don't feel like you have someone to talk to. So at a very bare minimum, you won't feel alone, and that is an advantage of therapy. Another advantage of therapy, speaking more logistically, is very often it's covered by insurance, or it's heavily subsidized by insurance. That can be a good advantage. Yeah, I think those are kind of the main big ones, really. So if you have a mentality of you're wanting to find a way to cope with the issue, and that's all you're content with, then therapy is probably the right route for you. If you feel very good with the catharsis of releasing your thoughts and feelings and speaking to someone else, therapy is probably a very good fit for you. Okay, those would be a couple key things. The third big route that is available to you is the go it alone route, and I want to talk through this a little bit in depth. Now, the go it alone route, believe it or not, is actually a very good, viable route for particular people dealing with particular challenges. So whenever I do a consultation and I'm trying to help somebody figure out what route is best for them, I do take a look to see, are they able to just go forward on their own right now and utilize their current resources, their current skills, and get this issue handled. And in some cases, it is totally doable. And I'll walk through that. Now, one example of this would be if you're dealing with if you're dealing with what I call acute anxiety or acute depression. This would mean that you don't have a history of feeling depression or anxiety, but all of a sudden you are feeling anxious or depressed. If you've been feeling anxious or depressed for less than 90 days, and if the anxiety or depression was brought on by a particular life event or a particular life circumstance. So some examples of this would be if you just had a death in your family. It's very understandable to be feeling quite down for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And in a lot of cases, it's not a signal that you need to go hire somebody and get help. You need to utilize a couple strategies. You might need to, get back on your workout routine and do maybe some meditation or do whatever it is that makes you feel good. Get back into your wellness routine, and you'll feel like yourself again pretty quickly. So if you go through a temporary little curveball situation like a death in the family or a layoff, getting fired, something like that, a breakup perhaps, Those can be situations where your mind is temporarily feeling like it's disoriented and it's going through a spin. And if you don't have a history of anxiety or depression, chances are you're going to feel better in a couple of weeks or a couple of months if you just work on trying to focus on improving yourself. So that would be a very simple example of when going alone may be the best thing for you, because it doesn't cost you anything financially, it doesn't cost you any more time, and you probably do have the resources or skills to make it happen. Okay, another good time when going alone is the right thing, I think, is when you have had a process that you put in place in the past that got you the mental health that you wanted, and you simply are no longer implementing that particular process. So that may mean that you do have the skills, you do have the resources, you do have the knowledge. You are just not currently doing what you know. And many times this is the case. Another good example with this would be physical health, right? Very often people have gotten in shape and then they go out of shape and they think, man, maybe I need a personal trainer. Well, maybe you need a personal trainer if you feel like you need help being held accountable. But if you already know what workout plans and what diet plans worked for you in the past, it may just be a simple matter of you need to have a little honest face-to-face conversation with yourself in the mirror, and you need to get your butt moving. You need to move your ass. You got to get implementing what you used to do. All right, so that would be another good example. So some people have been in a position where they meditated regularly and they became pretty successful with it, and it really reduced their anxiety tremendously, but then they fell out of the habit of doing it, and now they just need to get back on track with doing that. Journaling does work for a small portion of people. I find it's pretty ineffective for most people, but for some people it helps quite a bit. And you get the idea, right? There could be something else that you've done in the past that could work. Some of you guys literally just need to get back to the gym, although that's a small portion of you, okay? Most of you watching this or listening to this are going to have been in a situation where mental health has been a challenge for you for most of your life. You've been dealing with something chronically, and you've been trying multiple efforts on your own. And so the go it alone route is probably not the good, viable route for you in that particular case. Right? So the general rules of thumb are, if you've been dealing with this for longer than 90 days, if you find that you're constantly Googling things, you're looking things up on YouTube and social media endlessly, you're trying to piece together different ways to improve your mental health, that can become really frustrating because it feels like you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle without knowing what the picture of the jigsaw puzzle is. You'll feel like you make tiny little random connections here and there, but you won't feel this like sense of progress, like you are getting closer to a conclusion, right? So the go it alone route is usually not a great route if you've been trying that for 3 to 6 months or more, okay? I will also mention that the go it alone route is not good for things like anxiety attacks, panic attacks, chronic depression, things of that nature. If you are just going through a temporary period of feeling a little stressed, a little lack of motivation, then yeah, you might be able to just do the go it alone route and get yourself back on track, okay? The fourth route would be the retrain the brain route, right? And that's really the route that I do. There are other people out there who teach something sort of similar. I've never found another program or process that's really as in-depth and comprehensive as ours. That's not to say that I'm the only person out there that can help you. It's just that this is a totally different philosophy, right? So the retrain the brain route, I can only speak for myself, so I'll just explain kind of how I look at anxiety and depression. And again, like I said, each of these routes is really good for certain people and it's not good for other people. And it's just important for you to figure out which one is best for you. So the way that I look at anxiety and depression is, first of all, I look at them as very real, right? It's not like you're just making it up. You're not just being dramatic. You're not just trying to get attention, right? I view it as a very real thing, but I don't view it as a permanent mental illness that you are stuck with for the rest of your life, no matter what. I view it as a conditioned pattern of thinking and feeling in the nervous system that has become your automatic series of reactions to things that can be changed through conditioning, okay? Nobody pops out of the womb having anxiety attacks. It becomes something that becomes a learned, conditioned response in the nervous system over time. And so what we have to do is we have to do 3 fundamental things using my SSS conditioning method. Here's how we look at it. First, we have to identify each one of the current limiting mental patterns that's causing you an issue, because you cannot change something that you haven't already identified. With anxiety, there are about 4 to 5 distinct types of anxiety. With each one of those 4 to 5 types, there's only about 2 to 3 different types of causes. So we simply have to identify which one it is for you, because then we can start to figure out how to turn it around. With depression, it's an even smaller subsect. There's usually only about 3 or 4 types of depression. For each one of those, there's only 1 or 2 types of causes. So there's only about 12 to 14 different things we have to check for to see what do we need to fix, okay? So once we figure out what the real source of the issue is, then what we got to do is number 2, we have to interrupt that old pattern. So the metaphor that I like to use to describe this is, think of your mind like a jukebox that's got 100 CDs in it, let's say. You go up to that jukebox, you type in a sequence of numbers and letters, it brings forward the CD that is attached to that sequence of numbers and letters, and it plays the CD. Well, your mind works very similar to a jukebox in that way, where you will get triggered, right? The trigger is the numbers and letters. You'll get triggered by your external environment, and then it causes a habitual response of thought, a habitual response of feeling, a habitual response of behavior. And mental health challenges are really defined as that chronic, repetitive reaction to those particular triggers. So what we have to do is, number 1, identify the CDs, not the triggers. We have to identify the CDs. What are the common reactions that you're having? And we got to break it down in detail so you can figure out what the little microscopic patterns are that are causing the issue. Okay. If you're curious about more detail on that, I have a webinar. You can find it on my website that explains that in more detail. Okay, number 2 thing we have to do is we have to scratch that old CD up. We have to use conditioning-based processes, not coping processes, conditioning processes. Because if we scratch that old CD and it tries to play again, it's going to have a very difficult time playing. It's not going to play the same way, right? And so this makes it so that that old reactive pattern shows up less often. And when it does show up, it has less of a control over how you think and feel and behave, which is really, really cool. So when people start using my conditioning processes, typically within their first 2 weeks, we can get them about a 25% reduction in anxiety or depression. When we get to about month 2, we can usually get them about a 50% improvement. Month 3, we can usually get up to that 75% improvement, because it's quite literally, we're training the brain, right? We're breaking up the old neuroassociations so that your brain doesn't go down those same habitual patterns of thinking anymore. And then third and final, we have to replace the old conditioned patterns of thinking with something new. We got to train the brain to have a new automatic response. We got to replace the old CD with a new CD, so that now that whenever that old thing is triggered, boom, now we've got a new CD that plays instead. Right? So this is where we train your nervous system to show up being confident at work instead of being anxious. We cause you to feel more peace of mind when you notice that something is bothering you about your physical body, as opposed to feeling anxious and upset about it. We cause you to feel motivated instead of depressed when things don't go your way. Okay, things like that. So we have to identify what the big ones are for you, what your specific goals are, and then match that up. Now, like I said, this route is good for some people, not great for other people. So what I have found is that the route that I do, some advantages of it, firstly, is that we are able very reliably to help people improve their mental health by about 75% in 90 days. We do it so reliably, we guarantee in writing that we'll make that happen so long as somebody meets our qualifications. Like I said, not everybody is going to be a good fit. But for the people who are a good fit, we are able to confidently guarantee that because we know it works. So one advantage of our process is that you can, if you qualify and it matches up with what you're willing to bring to the table, then you are able to get a guaranteed level of results, which is really cool. Another advantage of it is you become the CEO of your own mental health long term. Because we're able to get people that result within 90 days, people are able to get rid of me within about 3 months. And so that means you're not reliant on me or a therapist or anybody else long term. You've got a set of skills that works really well, and you just keep using it. A third advantage is we set you up with a simple little daily system to keep your brain properly trained to avoid relapse. We really heavily prioritize relapse prevention and educating you on how to avoid that. There are some downsides or disadvantages, though, and I want to be very upfront and honest about that. So, one of the downsides, depending on how you look at it, is it does require a little bit more time and effort in that first 90 days, but it saves you a lot of time and effort in the long run. So, our process is very accelerated, and people need to be willing to set aside right around between 3 and 5 hours a week, really to do like some lessons and some homework and practice the skills. And they really need to be willing to make their mental health a very high priority for those couple of months while they're learning how to do that. But depending on how you look at it, it's somewhat a disadvantage, but it is an advantage too, because then you get freed up after the 3 months are over, right? So, but anyway, it does require a little work and effort. That's another big thing, right? So my process is really not a good fit for people who really are trying to go the easiest route possible, and really people who are looking for that should probably go towards the more medication route, because then you don't have to learn anything new, you don't have to try anything new. And then if there were another disadvantage, I think those are really the two big things. It just takes a little more effort and it takes a little time up front, right? But you do get the independence long term. You get to feel comfortable that you've got your mental health in a good place naturally without relying on other things long term. I never force people to go off medication. I never even tell people to go off medication. That would be illegal for me to do that. But I can tell you that last time we took a poll on this, I think it was right between 70 and 80% of our clients were off of their old medication within 6 months. Some of them have to taper off longer depending on how long they've been on it. But for people who don't want to be relying on medication, it tends to be a pretty good alternative process, right? But it does require a little work. It does require a little commitment. And the way I always explain it to people is my process is not a good fit for people who want to dip their toe in the water. My process is really the best fit for people who want to rip the damn Band-Aid off. Like, they want to get rid of anxiety or rid of depression, and they want to do it quick, they want to do it fast, they want to do it effectively, and they're willing to put in the work to make that happen. So, and that's not everybody, okay? So I put out these videos because I was once suicidal and depressed, and I don't want anybody to feel like that. Everybody on the planet deserves to live anxiety and depression free. You can do so. You just got to learn the right strategies to make that happen. Not every particular route is the right fit for every particular person. And yes, of course, we do have clients, but we care about serving you guys, which are a member of our community. We want to help you get access to whatever form of help you feel is best for you. So if you feel like you are having trouble finding an effective route through either of these 4 main philosophies, please let us know in the comments or reach out to us. If we can help you get connected with a therapist in your local area, or we can help you find access to somebody virtually, we'd love to help advise you on that. If you have questions or comments about what types of medications have worked or not worked, feel free to engage in the community, because people have different experiences, and you can serve other people by sharing, or you can ask a question to see if somebody else can resonate with your experience. So you might be able to speed up your process of finding an effective medication that way. If you're going to go it alone and you found that there was a route that worked for you in the past, please share that and pass it on with the community. Or if you have a question about how to utilize a go it alone route, please ask that question. We want to help get your questions answered. And then fourth, if you feel like you need something that's a little more in-depth, learning how to retrain the brain, then of course you're welcome to reach out to us at any time. You can always book a free coaching session with us at mentalhealthcoaching.com, and we're really happy to help you out. So please reach out at any point, and thanks for showing up, and thanks for your attention, and continue to show up with us, and we'll help you improve your mental health, okay? Take care, guys. See you soon. Bye.